Welcome everyone to the Global Alliance for Rights of Nature, GARN, press conference co-hosted by the Women's Earth and Climate Action Network WECAN. My name is Osprey Oyer Lake, and I'm the Executive Director of WECAN. I'm also honored to serve on the Executive Committee of GARN. I want to thank my colleagues for participating in this press conference to share their important perspectives and voices, and they each will be introducing themselves in turn. We are living in a time in which we must change everything about how we are living with Mother Earth and each other. The urgency of the climate and ecological crisis demand that we completely redesign our economic, social, and legal systems. In our global movement for rights of nature, we are looking for a revolutionary and evolutionary change for society. And at the heart of it, we are asking, how can we transform our horrifically dysfunctional environmental laws and neoliberal economic systems that are destroying people and planet? I also want to acknowledge that much of the vision and worldview of the Rights of Nature framework comes from Indigenous peoples around the world and their knowledge of the natural laws of Mother Earth. After decades of environmental protection laws, which surely have achieved some success, our modern legal systems have failed to prevent increasingly grave threats of global warming, degradation of Earth's sacred systems of life, and the growing displacement and death of humans and other species. In particular, there is concern for Indigenous and frontline communities who bear the worst impacts of disasters because of environmental racism and other social injustices. To truly live sustainably and live in harmony with the Earth, we need to change the very foundations, the very structural DNA of our legal frameworks to respect the natural laws of the Earth. Today, the majority of the world's legal frameworks are based on treating nature as property. Our life-giving rivers, forests, and mountains are treated as property to be sold and consumed. As properties, these natural communities and ecosystems are not recognized as rights holders. By maintaining the current structure of law that we have now, we are furthering a dangerous human relationship to the natural world of ownership and exploitation. We have to ask ourselves, why haven't we stopped these destructive actions that are not only lethal, but also legal under the laws? We need an entirely different legal configuration that recognizes the Earth's living systems are not the enslaved property of humans. The primary premise of the Rights of Nature movement is that in order to ensure a thriving future, humans must reorient themselves from an exploitive and ultimately self-destructive relationship with nature. This is key. We need to move to a system that honors the deep interrelation of life and contributes to the health and integrity of the natural world. An essential step in achieving this is to create a system of jurisprudence that sees and treats nature as a fundamental rights-bearing entity and not as mere property to be exploited. As a global movement, we are advocating that breaking out of the human-centered limitations of our legal current frameworks is one of the most transformative and highly leveraged actions that humanity can take to create a healthy and just future for all. And as climate disruption and environmental degradation increases globally, it could be not more important to highlight that exploitation and extractivism is a result of patriarchal societies, colonization, racism, and neoliberal capitalism, which are all based upon the same systems and ideologies of power over and exploitation of women, Indigenous peoples, people of color, and the land. It is clear that the global community needs to address these systems of oppression in an intersectional manner to move towards justice and real solutions, and Rights of Nature can offer a vital path forward in this effort. What we are seeing in our collective work globally is that people's movements are rising to say no to the commodification of Mother Earth or the sky. Our earth and atmosphere are not for sale. We don't want our sacred earth, water, air, and forests in the marketplace. We don't want to see carbon offset programs. These are false solutions to the climate crisis. Instead, we want to see pollution stopped at the source and for governments and corporate actors and all of us to live with respect and reciprocity with Mother Earth. We cannot keep taking and taking, or very simply, humans will not survive. Like Mother Earth's immune system, people are rising up in their communities worldwide to say yes to Rights of Nature. And in fact, we are an ever-growing movement. At the national level in 2008, Ecuador became the first country in the world to recognize rights of nature in the Constitution of Ecuador. Local rights of nature ordinances in the United States today are protecting communities from harmful practices such as shale gas drilling and fracking, and there have been over 36 ordinances that have passed in the U.S. The Ponca Nation has made history as the first tribe in the U.S. to recognize rights of nature into law to protect to protect their territory from fossil fuel extraction. And in New Zealand, the Parliament has given the Wanganui River standing. The Colombian Supreme Court has recognized rights of the Amazon River ecosystem. So yes, rights of nature is an idea whose time has come, and it's actually being implemented, and we need to see it replace a lot of the systems that we now have. Part of our work at GARN is to host international rights of nature tribunals. These past few days, we've had the honor to hold the 5th International Rights of Nature Tribunal. On October 3rd, we had the climate change case, addressing false solutions to the climate change crisis. And on November 4th, just yesterday, we held the Amazon case, addressing that the Amazon is a threatened living entity. And these tribal verdicts will be announced on November 7th at 9:30 a.m. during a showing of The People and Nature versus the UNFCCC at the Glasgow Film Theatre. And that will be for the climate change case. And so you can hear the verdict from the tribunal there. And on November 9th at 2 o'clock, the Amazon case verdict will be announced during the World Amazon Assembly Center for Contemporary Arts. So you have an opportunity to hear more about the tribunal at these verdict hearings. And we invite all of you to support the rights of nature efforts globally as we demand system change and a new way of thinking within the natural laws of Mother Earth. And I was very honored to be a judge for the climate change case. And I'm really excited to have my other colleagues here who are also judges for the different cases on climate change and the Amazon. And I hand the floor over to you now, Lisa. Thank you.
Thank you, Osprey. My name is Lisa Mead. I'm a lawyer. I represent the Earth Law Alliance, and I'm a member of the steering committee of the Ecological Law and Governance Association. And I'm very honoured to have been asked to be a judge in the climate change case. False solutions to climate change, and to tell you a little bit about what we heard on the 3rd of November, we had a number of witnesses who made testimony as to the ways in which certain things that are being proposed or already happening are actually false solutions to the climate crisis. For example, carbon capture and storage, which is being touted as a possible solution, in fact, is just perpetuating the very dirty and damaging fossil fuel industry and actually giving very little in the way of carbon capture. And in that case, we heard from a couple in Chile who gave her testimony about the Quintero Bay and the deeply damaging and polluting activities there that are affecting all living beings, the beings in the sea, as well as the humans living around the bay. We heard how carbon offsetting is a false solution in that it's simply moving the problem elsewhere and can cause damage to communities where things are pushed onto them, indigenous communities, solutions that are pushed onto them that they may not want, or forests that are grown that ultimately are chopped down in 30 years' time because they're just monoculture crops. They're not helping biodiversity or helping the earth. So our task as judges is to deliberate on the evidence that we were presented, and we apply in doing that the Universal Declaration of the Rights of Mother Earth. And this was a civil society declaration that came into being in 2010. And it holds that Mother Earth is sacred, all beings on Earth are sacred, and that all living beings have rights. We all have the right to exist, and of course many of those rights are being threatened as I speak. And the right to a habitat, the right to exist in the first place, the right to generate oneself, to evolve. These are all part of what rights of nature is about. And I would say that the most important thing to remember is that there are solutions that could solve the climate crisis that are not being discussed here, or maybe they are, but they're not getting the headlines. And we see millions really propping up the fossil fuel industry, whereas things like agricultural practices that can sequester carbon in natural ways, and that create agricultural practices that actually create healthy living soil rather than destroying them with fossil fuel fertilizers and further depleting the planet, are things that we need to focus on, and many of the indigenous practices that we can learn from for millennia of experience that really should be at the top of the agenda here. I think that's all I will say. I will pass to my colleague, Pablo Solon.
Good afternoon. My name is Pablo Solon. I am from Bolivia. And in the case of the Amazon, I was the prosecutor of the earth. Why do we have a case on the Amazon in the International Tribunal on Rights of Nature? Because the Amazon is living its last days. During the entire case, we have presented enough evidence from indigenous people, from scientists, from experts on the ground, that if we don't act very fast in the coming years, the Amazon will start a process of dying on its own. We are approaching the tipping point of the Amazon. What we have asked the tribunal is that, in first place, they recognize that the Amazon is a living being that has rights on its own. It's not only a territory, it's not only an ecosystem, it is a living being that has rights. We have asked the tribunal that if the Amazon has rights, we have to change the way the Amazon is represented here in the United Nations negotiations on climate and other negotiations. The Amazon should have a voice, should be present as a living being. And this is key. This means we have to do big changes inside the UN to have these ecoregions, these living entities being present. We have highlighted that this is not only an issue about climate change, this is an issue of ecocide. Because in the Amazon, we have the biggest biodiversity of the world, and it is dying because of deforestation, mining companies, oil extraction, big hydropower dams, and other extractivist activities. So to stop, to save the Amazon, is to save the forms of life that we have known, is to stop the sixth massive extinction of life on Earth. We have also presented to the tribunal enough evidence to show that there is an approach to the Amazon that we don't share. That approach is to put monetary value to the functions of the Amazon, to create a carbon market around the Amazon, to create a fund to attract private investment to the Amazon. We don't think that by putting a monetary price to the functions of the Amazon, or by bringing private investment, we're going to save the Amazon. We're going to save the Amazon by hearing and respecting the rights of indigenous peoples that have lived there for centuries, by recognizing the rights of nature, the rights of the rivers, of the mountains, of the animals, of the Amazon. We are saying that if we want to save the Amazon, we have to change the way we do things, and we have to begin to look at how we restore the balance with nature and with these key ecosystems. We have clearly highlighted that there will be no solution to climate change if the Amazon dies. There is really no hope to stabilize the climate of the Earth system if we lose the Amazon. That is why we think that the tribunal has to act as soon as possible. We have also shown that there is a movement, not only in some countries, but in several countries of the Amazon, to recognize the rights of nature. This is the case of Bolivia and Ecuador, but it is also the case of Colombia, and there are also different municipalities in Brazil where this is moving forward. We think that a verdict from the tribunal can give a big push to this movement for the recognition of rights of the Amazon that is moving in the region. Finally, we have asked the tribunal to come to do a visit on the ground to see the real impact of what is happening with big hydropower dams like Monte, like big mining companies of iron or gold, to see how deforestation is moving forward so that they can present this to the 10th Social Forum of the Amazon that's going to take place in July. Thank you very much.
Hello, my name is Atosa Sultani, and I'm one of the judges. I have the honor of being one of the judges. I've been judged in 3 other tribunals. I'm also the founder of Amazon Watch and also a member of the Science Panel for the Amazon. And I want to say that to be a judge for the Rights of Nature Tribunal, we must, as judges, put on our holistic hat and put on a hat where we are there to see with eyes that are defending nature, see nature as a living entity with rights to exist and perpetuate, just subject of rights like any other being. And to do that, it takes amount of connecting to the source that nature is alive and keeping that in mind as we hear the case. So I want to share with you some of the sentiments of what I heard yesterday. And we had 10 witnesses, many from scientists to indigenous leaders to activists to academics. We heard an array of evidence about, like my colleagues have said, that the Amazon is reaching a point of no return. The tipping point is, we're basically at a tipping point. We heard from prominent Brazilian scientists and the chair of the science panel for the Amazon, Carlos Nobre, that the destruction of the Amazon had reached a point whereby the forest was no longer able to generate and recycle the water that it drives into the atmosphere, the flying rivers. And that those flying atmospheric rivers were at the point of collapse, and that could pursue what would be a massive dieback of the Amazon within the next 30 to 50 years. But the tipping point for that, crossing that threshold, is now. We heard that the Amazon used to be a sink to absorb carbon, and that in parts of the Amazon now it is a source of carbon because of deforestation. The Science Panel for the Amazon is releasing its report on the most definitive report on the tipping point on the 12th here at COP. So I encourage you to pay attention to that. We heard that the Amazon is, from Francisco Van Hildebrand, from Mr. Maya, that oil and gas in concessions now cover nearly 10% of the Amazon, that 833 dams are affecting 31% of the Amazon, that illegal mining and legal mining each are affecting 17% of the Amazon. Roads are affecting 55% of the Amazon, and so on and so forth. 17% is being affected by livestock and agriculture. The Amazon is being cut, it's being killed, death by 1,000 cuts. Now, we can fight one place at a time, but what we need to know is that to maintain the hydrological system of the planet, the rain machine, the biological heart of planet Earth, the biome's ecological integrity needs to be maintained. And all of this fragmentation and all of these things must stop. We must get to zero deforestation by 2025. We heard from Gregorio Mirabal, the head of COICA, that that questions the economic model, that it is this lifeline economic model that's behind all of this avalanche of destruction. That companies and governments must be held accountable, not only to the present, not only to the rights of nature and the rights of the species that are being destroyed, and the human rights, and the genocide and the ethnocide and the ecocide that is experiencing, but the rights of future generations who are going to be inheriting a world that is, in descent. We heard about the assassinations. We heard about threats to forced defenders. And we also heard about the market mechanisms that attempt to now solve the problem by expanding the value forests and making them visible to markets. We heard about the fallacy of those. We heard about the Belo Monte Dam and Belo Sun, and these large dams, the largest mines in the world now being planned for the Amazon. It was quite emotional. I have to say, this is a key moment for the Amazon. As judges, we must be able to sound the alarm bells. We did also hear about inspiring solutions. We heard from Domingo Peas, who's here today, who's available to be spoken to all of our witnesses, about the bioregional plan for the permanent protection of the sacred headwaters, to protect permanently, to leave fossil fuels in the ground, to support land rights, well-being. There's a whole plan on how to save, how we can transition from a life-blind economic system to one that is life-saving. Keeping fossil fuels in the ground was a theme we heard over and over, and we have to recognize that the Paris Agreement, not once does it mention fossil fuels. This is a flaw of the current economic and climate paradigm that is not looking at production and only looking at emissions. We have to look at nature's rights. We have to look at this Casul agreement, Amazon exclusion policy for investors. We have to declare a state of emergency because that's where we are. And ultimately, personhood for ecosystems, for species, for mountains and watersheds and rivers is at the heart of how we're going to do that. There are many solutions. We know that when we redefine wealth as to be aligned with the biological productivity of the earth, that both people and nature flourish. This dichotomy that we either have development or we have nature is a false dichotomy. And we show that by promoting and allowing nature to flourish, that ultimately we nourish and flourish ourselves as human beings. So, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, and we do have time for a few questions. I just wanted to add a little bit while you're thinking about your questions. I hope we have some from the audience. That another thing that was really important during the climate change case was a very strong presentation on the danger of geoengineering. And I really wanted to highlight that because I know here, in a lot of conversations that are in negotiations, there's a real push as if geoengineering is a resolve to the climate crisis. So polluters can keep polluting because somehow we're going to have these techno fixes. And we heard from several experts very powerfully of the problems of geoengineering. And I think that's very important because not only is there a technical problem and scientific problems with the geoengineering experimentation, some of which doesn't even exist, and is hoped to be in the future, but also it perpetuates the same mindset that we're in now. In other words, that we don't have to change our economy, we don't have to change our worldview, we don't have to change our habits, we don't have to change our structures that are unjust to Indigenous people, frontline communities. We don't have to change anything. We can do business as usual and just keep living this lifestyle that is not compatible with the natural laws of the earth, as Mother Earth is clearly showing us. And so there's really a double problem with geoengineering. It's the scientific issues that are problematic, but also it doesn't really address the root causes that got us into the climate crisis or the destruction of the Amazon in the first place. So for all of these reasons, we also need to really understand that what we're talking about here on this panel is systems change, and that rights of nature can really be an underlying framework for how we can change our values and our worldview about how to live in reciprocity with Mother Earth and learn from Indigenous peoples about what is a way of living that has worked for a long time that we now, as modern day people, really need to reincorporate. So with that, I want to open up the floor to any questions that we might have from any of you in the audience. If there's no question, I'd like to, we only have a few minutes left, why don't we go ahead and give each of you a closing comment, and our time is going to be out by then. So let's just go down and give everyone a closing comment on rights of nature. Thank you. Just
We definitely are at a crossroads. We have less than or barely any time to fix the place we're in. I've just come from the Friday for Futures March, and there were some very moving speeches there from Indigenous youth and youth from this country, and I felt for them. I felt very sad and moved that they are in the predicament they are in, and that my generation, the generations before me, have left them in this predicament. So I think it's incumbent upon all of us to do everything we can to remedy the situation, and I truly believe in relation to the Amazon, we are in an emergency situation, and it has to be addressed as such. Thank you.
I first would like to highlight what the chair of the tribunal in the case of the Amazon said. It was Leonardo Boff who was chairing the jury, and he said the solutions from the Amazon are going to come from the ground, from the territory. And it is with the indigenous people, with the Afro people that live there, with the populations that are suffering the destruction of the Amazon, that we must find a way out to save the Amazon. We see that what is happening in the United Nations is something discouraging. There are too many speeches, but not too many concrete actions to do what we need to do in order to save the heart of the planet, which is the Amazon. Thank you.
Gregorio Mirabal, Cuenca, the Indigenous Organization of the Amazon Basin, reminded us that we must have a global agreement for the permanent protection of the Amazon. Because of that, Cuenca has launched a campaign calling for 80% of the Amazon to be permanently protected by 2025. And that people can go to Amazonia 80 by 25 to learn more about that effort. I also want to say that I'm encouraged that in October, the United Nations Council on Human Rights actually recognized the right to a healthy environment as a human right. We are progressing, there are victories, that the Global Alliance for the Rights of Nature has continued to document many advances with rivers, personhood for rivers, and legal cases that are won on behalf of rivers, on behalf of nature. And those cases, judges are learning more about them in the courts of law, and that the citizens' tribunals are also playing a key role in helping change norms, helping change values, and basically setting new frameworks for legal rights. So we all have a responsibility to help advance these frameworks. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you so much, colleagues, for your work, and it was an honor to be a judge with all of you on this important tribunal. As I said, we can hear the verdicts on the 7th and on the 9th. And I think in the closing, what I'd like to do is just share something that I learned from an elder when I was in New Zealand to learn about how they practice rights of nature there on the Whanganui River. And she said to me, we see the river as our ancestor. We see the river as a living ancestor. And really remembering that we all come from nature and not forgetting that nature is our relative, that we are family and relative with nature. And they have a saying there, I am the river and the river is me. I am the river and the river is me. And I think it's really important for us all to remember who our mother is and that we need to respect Mother Earth. Thank you.